Now on BBC News, your questions answered on travel disruption. Around 2 million people are set to fly over the bank holiday, but thousands of passengers have seen flights cancelled and delays at airports. TUI has announced it will cancel 6 flights a day until the end of June. EasyJet continues cancelling its flights ahead of the Jubilee celebrations. So let's talk about that. With me here in the studio is Julia Bue-Said, Chief Executive at the Advantage Travel Partnership, and travel correspondent Simon Calder. So much for us to talk about and so many questions to get through, but nice to see you. Thanks for coming in. Let's start first of all with just how we are in this mess. I talked about TUI there telling us that it's going to cancel 6 flights a day. 34,000 holidaymakers, they now say, will be affected by this. Julia, why are we in this mess?
It's, you know, we have to start by looking back at the last 2 years, and you really cannot shut down an entire global system without, unfortunately, as we're starting to recover, trying to build back businesses to get it back into a place where operationally it can scale up quickly, resilient, be resilient, and it really is a consequence of trying to build back over a period of real surge in demand. We're seeing something like 20% increase over 2019 just for this week alone. So it's the ability to scale up, really quickly over a short period of time, which is really exacerbating some of these issues. Yeah,
and I know some of these questions that we'll get to in a second really do cover that. But Simon, you could say the industry knew this was going to happen. It's half-term holidays, it's the Jubilee weekend, it's coming up to summer. It's not a great surprise that people want to get away.
Well, and that's certainly what the government is doing. It's blaming the airports and the airlines, saying, yeah, it's clearly predictable. If you're not ready, then that's your fault. The aviation industry, meanwhile, is absolutely furious because they're pointing their finger back and saying, hang on, for most of the last 2 years, we've had the most onerous, irrational, expensive travel restrictions of any country in Europe. And bear in mind that this time a year ago, we'd only just finished a 19-week complete ban on international travel. We'd just gone into the traffic light phase, if you can remember that. I'm sure you can.
Oh, yes.
Portugal was the only country, the only major country that you could go on holiday to. Yeah. I know that we both flew out there separately on the first possible day, and within 2 weeks it was back on the amber list and you had to quarantine again. And that carried on pretty much all through the summer. Anybody remember Amber Plus, when suddenly the France was put effectively on the no-go list? And so it's been pretty awful. And certainly, yes, it was the airlines, airports having said, oh, we desperately want to be able to fly people. Suddenly they can't. But it's also a bit of optimism bias. This is the industry of human happiness. Everybody hopes everything's going to go terribly well, and very often it does. The vast majority of people are on holiday, having a lovely time. It's just really sad for the many, many people who aren't.
Of course, yes, so much frustration, isn't there? The government would say, though, Simon, wouldn't it, that this is what the furlough scheme was designed to do. It was designed to keep people in jobs so that they weren't sacked, so they would be ready when things picked up again. But that's not happened.
Well, there's been lots and lots of things happening, of course, and as we've known, you've talked about many times, there's been quite a lot of people who just thought, work, don't think I'll bother anymore, thanks. And if they're comfortable enough, that's absolutely great for them. But there's a particular Brexit issue as well. And this is all to do with the large number of EU citizens, typically who left during the COVID pandemic, haven't come back, partly because of Brexit. Their jobs in the hospitality industry that they left behind, anecdotally, I'm hearing a lot of people from aviation have moved into those jobs to kind of backfill the spaces, and they're not going to be enticed back into aviation anytime soon to work in a very high-stress environment that involves getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and being yelled at.
Yeah, we know what that's like, don't we? Simon, thanks. Let's jump straight into the questions, and thank you for all your questions that you've sent in. Charles and Julia, I'll start with you on this one. Charles asks, why are airlines overbooking flights? He says you wouldn't find a supermarket taking your money for a loaf of bread and then saying, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have any. So why are they still selling them?
I think the reality is for a lot of airlines, they really don't know what their load factors are until much nearer to departure. So they're having to manage crew rotas, capacity, and sometimes it's very last minute before they can make sure they can put the right number of flights on and know exactly what they have available to sell. So it just becomes, again, a very difficult operational balance that they're looking to do. What we have seen is a number of flights consolidated. So where you have multiple departures to a destination on a day, those flights have been consolidated to try and get consumers out, unfortunately on a different flight time, but to the destination on the same day.
It strikes me, though, of all the sort of industries where you can predict what's going to happen, this is quite a clear one. People have to book a seat on the plane, don't they? They know they're going to turn up at the airport and go through security, and they might have bags. It's quite an organised system. The rules make it so. So why is it so difficult to plan right now?
There are so many challenges, really operational challenges. In the main, the booking period between departure and booking has reduced. So we're seeing a significant portion of bookings coming in very last minute. So just trying to manage that at the best of times is difficult, let alone when you're coming through. I think also trying to manage when you have less staff, crew, you're trying to manage crew timetables and crew work hours. It becomes very, very challenging. So it's one issue after another, which is just exasperating the problem. But again, say very last minute bookings on top of pent up demand in a peak period is really causing huge amounts of issues for the industry to work through.
Simon, there's a very similar question here. This is from John, who's in Southport. He says, is it legal to continue selling tickets when there are not enough staff to make those trips possible?
Look, airlines are putting on what they think they will be able to cope with. Clearly, they've been found out and they haven't got the resources. And that might be anything from cabin crew being sick. Of course, there's still plenty of COVID around, very unfortunately, to recruiting people, and certainly talking to recruiting consultants. They say that there are more vacancies than there are people coming forward, and that very often people are applying for jobs and they're not even bothering to turn up at the interview because they've got many other options. Add to that the problem of security checking and making sure that everyone is properly qualified to work in an airport, on top of the usual training, and it is looking pretty miserable. I mean, if I can try and be optimistic, it could well be a tough weekend again, although TUI and EasyJet are trying to minimise that by cancelling flights up front. But from Monday onwards, it will get a lot easier for a good month or so. And that gives the airports and the airlines time, I hope, to throw money at the problem, which will be enticing new people in with better rates of pay. One Canadian airline has just this afternoon said, we're celebrating International Flight Attendants Day. I bet you didn't know it was. No. By increasing our pay. And anybody starting with this Canadian airline is on almost £30,000 a year as you start training. So it can be solved, but they've only got a few limited weeks before you get into July and August, which, as Julia knows, is make or break time.
I suppose, if anything, it's given us a new appreciation of the work that these staff do, don't they? We'll come back to sort of your rights in a second if you face a cancellation. Julia, Simon mentioned trading and recruitment. How long does that process last? Because it's not like you can click your fingers and all these staff are suddenly ready to work. And that's a question from, it's an anonymous question, I should say, but I suppose one that we all want to know. How long until these staff can get to work? Yeah,
it's a really good point. I think in normal times, let's say pre-pandemic if we can, that process probably take between 6 to 8 weeks. So we're now seeing, again, with the increase of recruitment and the increase of staff that airlines are trying to train, it's taken a lot longer. With that, you need to get your security clearance in that. So it can take up to 3 months, depends on the airline and depends on how many staff they're trying to work through the process.
Yeah, it does take time, doesn't it? So Simon, let's talk about your rights. If you face a cancellation, a delay. Ian in Surrey says, what are my rights if the airline vouchers expire? And that's because it's particularly busy right now because a lot of people are trying to use the vouchers from stuff that was cancelled over the last couple of years.
Yes, certainly. It's called voucherflation. That's the idea of everybody trying to redeem their vouchers. Now, it all depends what sort of voucher it is. Sorry to be unspecific about it, but many people who booked flights during particularly 2020 and into 2021, where the flight didn't actually take off, everybody should have actual money back by now. There were some horrible stresses and strains and people getting vouchers when they needed money. Instead, Also, the travel industry has been issuing refund credit notes, which are basically backed by the Atoll scheme.
Yes.
And the whole idea is that you don't say to the holiday company, I need all my money back now. You say, OK, I'll let you keep that. I might get another holiday with you, but if not, by a certain date, I will get that back. But looking at this particular example, it involves having got 1/3 of the money back and then the rest as a voucher, which looks to me, Julia, as though it's possibly some kind of online travel agent, quite possibly not based in the UK. And I'm afraid in that sort of position, you are on tricky territory.
I think, can I just add to that point? I think Simon makes a really important point, and I think one of the things to learn from this is actually being so careful about how you book and who you book with, because your rights really do vary. So think about what travel company you're booking with, where are they based, is it a travel agent you can talk to, how can they help you? It's a really important point coming out of this as well. Yeah,
and there's a question here actually. This is from Chris, and he says, can I get a refund if I miss my flight because the airline does not open more check-in desks? Because there is a danger in all of this that a lot of different stages pass the buck to the other. So they say, well, our flight was ready to go, but you couldn't get through security, or you could get through security, but your bag went missing. Let's talk first of all about that. Chris, can he get a refund if he misses his flight because there aren't the check-in desks open?
Well, if it's the airline's fault, then absolutely.
And that would constitute the airline's fault if it was a check-in desk.
Absolutely, yes. So I think once you clear security, once you've gone through that, I mean, I was at Stansted yesterday. It's very busy. Flight went fine. But actually, if you're queuing up, spending lots of time in the shops, in the bars, in the restaurants, and then trying to get on your flight, you might have a bit of an issue. So I think I think some of those things that we need to take on board now and think about actually how can we make sure that we're not putting ourselves in a situation where we're going to miss a flight. But where it's the airline's fault, it's down to them to compensate you and make sure that they can either get you on an alternative flight or a full refund. And
speaking of alternative flights, Hal asks, maybe this for you, Simon, can we get our money back if the airlines reschedule the flight for the next day and maybe you can't travel the next day?
Oh, sure, yes. I mean, the rules are quite specific. If your flight is delayed by 5 hours, you have an automatic right to a refund. If it's a package holiday, it slightly depends on the overall extent of your trip, but certainly a 24-hour delay for a 1 week or a 2 week holiday, that looks absolutely a candidate for getting a full refund.
Good, nice and clear. We like that. Julia, Claire says, is it worth setting off to the airport for my TUI flight if the company keeps cancelling flights? And Claire, I assume, is going to be one of the people who could be affected by those 6 cancellations a day out of Manchester. What are your rights there? Should you set off if you think it's at risk?
It's a really difficult one, isn't it? Because if you haven't been notified, then there's every chance, and in the vast majority of cases, it's not great. 37 flights out of their full capacity is a small percentage of them. Not great for Claire at all. But actually, if you haven't been notified, then you will need to set off to the airport, and hopefully your flight will be fine. But in the vast majority of cases, flights will take off, and millions of people will be able to enjoy their holiday.
My understanding is that TUI has actually told everybody who's in this contingent of 6 flights a day, 43 flights a week, your flight is cancelled, so they know. And of course, anybody who's travelling in the next 2 weeks is entitled to cash compensation on top of what TUI is doing, which is refunding the cost of the package holiday and giving everybody a £200 voucher. Although I have spoken to a number of people today who say if they think we're travelling with TUI again, they've got another thing coming. However, I've said I'm not flying with airline X or going with company Y before now, and I've turned up again if they've got the right product at the right price.
Glutton for punishment sometimes, aren't we? So, I mean, all of this begs the question, doesn't it? After what's been such a difficult 2 years for the aviation industry, for the tourism industry, for the travel industry, they've been short of cash. They're now spending even more cash having to compensate people, aren't they? And
I think that's where the situation is going to be resolved by the fact that, well, just look at the EasyJet cancellations. They said on Friday we're going to cancel 240 flights over the next 10 days. Now, I think they're actually cancelling more than that. They cancelled 40 alone just today. But if you just look at the money they're going to have to hand out to each passenger, that's £10 million before they've even started paying for hotel accommodation and buying tickets on other airlines, as they're obliged to do. That is going to be replicated at TUI, who are losing an awful lot of revenue as well as having to compensate people. And effectively, that's a great incentive. It's the only incentive they need to start trying to make things an awful lot better. What they're terrified of is that the government is going to come in and say, effectively, right, EasyJet, right, TUI, we don't think you can run all the trips you've planned. We're going to get you to cancel 10% of your operation now for July and August, which would mean holidaymakers would suddenly find, oh, your trip's been cancelled, even though perhaps the company could have run it. Very, very difficult situation. But money talks, as you know, and it will be, I think, a question of them desperately trying to turn things around because, quite rightly, consumers have some very valuable entitlements.
Yeah, interesting, as you said, that TUI are sort of trying to get all of this out in the open up front and then hopefully save themselves some problems later down the line. But nonetheless, let's see how that plays out. Question for you, Julia. This is from Joan. She says, any recommendations when travelling from airports? She's flying from Manchester. I mean, I was caught up in some chaos on Sunday in Dublin. It felt like I should take snacks and water and everything for the queue just to get into the airport building. So, what advice for people?
I think, as you've done, be prepared. Be prepared that if you're travelling, I can't remember when Joan's travelling, but
she says tomorrow.
Tomorrow, so it's likely to still be busy. We're still in half term, so be prepared that there may be queues. She may be unfortunate, have to queue a bit longer. Come with snacks and things and games and stuff if she's travelling with kids. Check her flights. Make sure she checks all her flights before she departs. Check she has all the right paperwork because let's not forget, when we're travelling, there are still restrictions at the other end, and it's very, very easy to forget. I flew to Spain yesterday and actually completely forgot you had to wear a mask. So we've got to remember there are still restrictions, and they're the small things that will help us just minimise some of the anxiety, some of the stress where people haven't travelled.
Can I be slightly counterintuitive and say, don't turn up too early, because this is actually causing some of the problems. Now, from an individual point of view, if you've got a 10 o'clock in the morning flight from Manchester Airport, you might think, I'm going to turn up at 5 o'clock. I'm going to make absolutely sure I will get on my flight. And that will certainly happen. However, you'll be in the way of me turning up for my 7 o'clock flight, where I thought, well, a couple of hours, that'll be all right. And actually, the fact that you're there means that I'm going to be delayed. So actually, it's not a popular thing for the airports to say, but some of this is actually down to rational individual passenger behaviour, which taken as a whole means that things get gummed up even more than they might be. Yeah,
absolutely. And Julia, briefly, we should remember in all of this, the staff that are at the travel agent, on the plane, at the airport, in the security queue, they're there, they're working, they're trying to do a good job, aren't they? We need to be nice to them.
Oh, they've had a really tough time. They really have, and it continues to be really brutal. Be kind, be nice, and just think, they're really trying hard to get this right. And the only thing they want is for people to have a great holiday and a great time.
Yeah, here's hoping people actually get away after 2 difficult years. Thank you to you both, to Julia and to Simon. Thanks for being with us and answering some of those questions. Plenty more still coming in over the course of the afternoon.